It's ready for you. Don't worry about
Okay, good.
Right. We are all live on the internet. Hey everybody, welcome to the stream, the System Shock 2 20th anniversary stream. I've got some very, very important people with me here today. Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us, like Daniel said, for the 20th anniversary stream of System Shock 2. We've got with us Nate Wells, who was the 3D artist and concept artist for System Shock 2. Hi, Nate.
Hello.
We've also got Marc LeBlanc, who was the lead engine programmer on System Shock 2. Hi, Marc.
Hi.
Unfortunately, we were not able to get Jonathan Che. He had some last-minute scheduling conflicts. So thank you very much, Mark, for stepping in. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
We've also got Sir Lawrence from Funhouse.
Yes, hello. Very happy to be here.
And your normal Night Dive crew, Daniel, of course, John. Say hi, John.
Hey, everybody.
And Karlee, our community manager supreme.
Oh, it's me.
Quite the group.
So, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody kind of vote for what build they want Daniel to start with. And the options will be OSA, Navy, and Marines. So, Karlee, I'm not sure. Do we want to just kind of take a quick look at the Twitch chat and see what the overwhelming answer is, or do we want to make this official?
So far, I'm seeing OSA. So,
Give me
oh
the
yeah,
easy one.
well, it's mostly OSA, one Navy, another OSA Marine, OSA Navy, OSA Navy,
Oh,
Marines, OSA Airbus. Okay, it's gonna be OSA. I feel like so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, these guys want me to struggle.
Yeah.
Everybody always starts OSA and then slides towards Navy. I mean, that's what I always did.
Yeah, guilty. All right.
Can
Mark,
we just pay attention to Myas Mark with the wrench marine?
All right.
We've got 222 people. That's
Wow.
32.
Pathetic creature of meat and bone, panting and sweating as you run.
Yeah, it's the arm only run. Just Psy, Orb, and Wrench. Oh, I gotta be quiet. It's starting.
You can talk over this. It's fine. I'm sure the people here have
come
probably
on.
heard this about maybe 500 times before.
Okay, that's fair.
Just like what, not even a full year ago, we were doing the dice rolling run.
Oh yeah, that was fun. We need to do that again.
Yeah.
In 2072,
That one
what is
I
that?
love.
You
I
roll
rolled
dice
the
to make all your
dice.
choices.
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
I roll the dice for Daniel, and then we make stupid rules as we go.
Wow,
I'm
I have not
basically the
seen that
DM.
Wait a while.
Oh, that would be like as a co-op maybe thing? One character is the designated DM? Huh.
Exactly.
And this is a question out of pure ignorance. Is there a randomizer or a randomizer community for System Shock 2? I feel like it would be perfect for that.
They may be.
I'm sure there is, but I just physically grab my dice and do the roll.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I just like to really torture Daniel. It's my favorite hobby.
That's not a lie.
So I want to ask Nate and Mark a couple of quick questions while we're watching the intro and watching Daniel do the build. Nate, we'll start with you. It actually says on Moby Games, kind of hidden away, that you did some programming on System Shock 2. Is that true?
That's a misprint. yeah, it's tough to get things off Moby Games, but no, I haven't programmed a thing in my life. Maybe an alarm clock. I think I've programmed an alarm clock. But
Okay,
you
so
wore
it
a lot
also
of hats
says
days. You
Yeah.
did build both these spaceships. Nice.
it also says that you were a level builder and designer on Thief. Is that true?
It is true.
Okay, so it's not all lies.
Yeah, I built Constantine's mansion and then into the Bone Horde and then Ramirez's mansion, something like that.
Oh,
Um,
I love those levels.
They're fun.
So what have you been
Those are
up to since 1999?
Not much. No, let's see. Well, I did after. So, it was about in beta that I actually left Thief and went to work on System Shock 2. Ken approached me, because we were sharing an office with Looking Glass at that time. And Ken approached me in the break room and he's like, hey, you want to come work on System Shock? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. So Looking Glass ended up sort of leasing me over to Irrational. And I wasn't an employee until actually System Shock 2 was over. I was actually officially a Looking Glass employee, subcontracting to Irrational.
I saw those particles when the first time those particles got in.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is the future.
This is one of my. Oh, you got to get the basketball. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because Shock 1, didn't have. They had those levitator things, those repulsor lifts or whatever we called them, but you couldn't tell where they began and ended. Like
So that a Happy Noodle sign, which was one of my favorite things that I put in this game. If you look to the left.
Oh, sorry. There might be a bit of a stream delay, but I'll go back.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
That's okay. To reinterpret that.
The repulsor lives, yeah.
Easter egg. I try to find a way to reinterpret that and put it in pretty much every game I've worked on, in some tiny little way.
Really? Can you let us know all the games it's in and where it is so we can all find it? Are you going to leave it a mystery?
Half of them I don't even remember. It's probably like some barely legible thing on a pack of gum or something.
That would be awesome to have like
Once you decide on your
a
branch of
multi-game
service,
scavenger.
there's no going back.
You're just trying
The
to...
shuttle will take
I
you
know.
to the UN
I want to see a
Orbital Space
YouTube
Station,
playthrough
where you'll
finding
receive
all
a
the
briefing regarding your yearly postings.
There you go. OSA, huh?
Some fan guy, get on that.
Guess it's OSA. Also, I just threw up a System Shock 2 Steam key. Look for the name Honey Dairy. That's the one throwing them up. I have both accounts up, but this is the computer I'm on.
So Mark, let's move on to you briefly. You were the lead engine programmer on Shock 2.
I guess. I don't know if I deserve the title lead, but I certainly was an engine programmer. You were talking about the spurious programming credit. My favorite. I just want to segue into or tangent into a spurious credit story that I have, which is that on one of the versions of Flight Unlimited, I think the Windows version, we added new airfields, and I had ended up being the one who recorded the tow plane pilot recording for when you're flying in a glider, you're towed up by a tow plane, right? And someone had to record somebody flying and taking off, right? So that the tow plane, that would be the tow plane's recording, right? And so I got credited as a pilot in one of those Flight Unlimited games, even though I have never flown a plane in my life. So.
Your body has been neglected in your
but what have I been up to?
What have you been up to?
So obviously it's been 20 years. So I briefly went to work on sports games. I built the commentary engine that as far as I know, the 2K franchise still uses. And then I was CTO of an indie company for 10 years, called it had changed names a couple times, but it was called Mind Control for a while. We did a game called Oasis, which won the IGF in 2004. And then we did all kinds of work for hire kind of stuff, educational stuff, shooters and mobile and console and all kinds of stuff. We did. Oh, nice.
I would just like to ask who was responsible for programming the Macarena into the game.
I was a straight motion capture. We tagged on to one session.
Yeah.
We had our performer just throw that in. Boy, if that doesn't date this game, nothing does.
Yeah. Really. Yeah.
Everybody watching is like, what the hell is the Macarena?
Yeah.
That's what everybody did before flossing.
Exactly. Yeah, it was pretty much the flossing of the late 90s.
Yeah.
That is wow.
Except old people could do it.
Yeah.
You say something so bold yet so true.
So Mark, I got a quick question here.
Sure.
Two-parter. Did you get your start in games as a quality assurance person on Ultima Underworld, the Stygian Abyss?
I suppose you could say that's true. So I was part of the giant long chain of nepotism that was Looking Glass. So Looking Glass was born because, well, not born totally, but the big one was Doug Church played D&D with a guy whose uncle was Paul Neurath, and that's how he got introduced to Paul. And then Doug lived down the hall from us at MIT, and he eventually hired everybody on the hall essentially to work on. But yeah, I got a QA credit in Underworld 1 because they were all making the game, and I was hanging around play. I don't think I got paid to play test or anything. I was just hanging around with them, playing their game, and occasionally finding bugs. And so they gave me a QA credit. So that was I was a grad student at the time. So that was my intro to the game industry, if you will.
So one of the things I found out about Jonathan Che, who, I was going to ask him if he was here, but it says that he has a PhD in cognitive science. Are you also a PhD?
No, I just have a master's in comp sci. But yeah, there's a lot of really brainy, educated folks at Looking Glass, not necessarily, and Irrational, not necessarily doing what their degree says. Like, for example, the person who did all of our mocap import was Laura Baldwin, right? And she has a PhD in virology.
Wow.
But yeah, she did all of our and she also is famous for writing the go into the bear pits little vignette in at the beginning of Thief. So she did a lot of writing, and she did all the mocap importing for I think all of the Thief engine games, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not.
So the last question I have for you, and then we'll just kind of let it go, is I've always been curious about the Dreamcast port that supposedly was being made. Do you have any information on that? Is there anything that you could share?
You know, I don't. I ran into some people who said they were doing it once. I don't know how.
Bit of that.
Yeah, I don't know how.
It's a rumor. I do remember something actually happening about that, but I wasn't obviously in the main loop on that. So, but I do remember it being talked about.
I feel like one of the I feel like didn't the source code get leaked or something of the Dreamcast port or something?
Or
like
that could be.
One of the leaked source drops was from that. I don't know. I could be wrong. I didn't know how you do it because like our save game file was not, at all optimized for fitting on a tiny memory card. So I don't know how you do a game where you're saving every position of every object every time you leave the level.
Man, I was even thinking in terms of UI and interface.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
Oh, that would have
Bioshock
to be completely
flattened
rethought.
Yeah.
It was certainly
that was our main
Halo,
thing on
right?
Bioshock.
It was before Halo, right? It was before anyone was really talking about doing first person
Yeah, there's the prehistoric GoldenEye eras where you could either look or shoot, but never both.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah.
So we kind of already moved through that phase of the game, but I've always been fascinated by the introduction, the effort paid to just kind of like how you secret or sort of put this entire container around rolling a character. And then also kind of like you were talking about with the noodle logo and stuff like that, there's actually some world building going on there that you kind of move away from since the rest of the game is kind of trapped in space. I don't know. I don't know if either of you can provide any context on that, but I always find it interesting when games provide you little glimpses of something much larger outside of the game itself. Oh, there it is.
Talking about the character generation part.
Yeah. Where you choose your training, and that's even kind of
Which is
implemented
now
in the story.
that is a straight rip from Traveler.
Yeah.
I don't.
Right.
This is a role-playing game, late '80s, Steve Jackson, and that's how you generated your character. You would say what you were going to do, and then you would roll to the outcome of that training. You could break a leg, you could be completely successful, you could die
during character creation.
Yeah, you could die. Yeah, you could die and have to start over. And that was something Ken and I and John and Zimu, we all loved that. We used to sit around and roll Traveler characters and never play because that part was so fun. That your character started with this completely integrated narrative. That you could carry with you as a character. So you had your backstory was real in a way. It wasn't something you just fabricated I was the, half-breed son of a dark elf and a human. You actually had a story that made sense within the game universe. So.
Yeah, and then those statistics obviously carry over and are extremely consequential when the game starts because it either enables or severely limits what you can do. So it's almost like you keep feeling those beats as the game goes on.
The only kind of broken part about it is you don't know what those values mean yet, right? On your first playthrough.
Yeah.
They're ultimately pretty meaningless to you. So you're not making decisions at the beginning, but generally they're subtle enough that they can be corrected, with nanites, within the first level, for the most part.
So if you were to go back now, I mean, in a way, the tutorialization does kind of walk you through all that stuff. But yeah, you're right. The consequence of those decisions is only felt hours later.
Oh God! If we did it today, my friend has a term for current state of game design called "no gamer left behind," where where you would have to go into exhaustive explanation of all these systems so that no one made a bad choice.
Right. I mean, if you look at like StarCraft, like in the single player of StarCraft 2, there's little videos to show you like what the upgrade you're gonna about to buy is gonna get you and things like that.
Right. Either that or there'd be a back around every corner. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, and it's something that I've thought a lot about. Is how do you provide players meaningful choice, but also sort of like soften the blow if they make the wrong one, or maybe they experience an unintended consequence.
Well,
I
yeah,
feel
you
like
want to make informed choices, right? Like it's how do you create informed choices, right? And they haven't played the game yet, right? So,
yeah.
I guess maybe what I see a lot now is like let players make choices, have them experiment with those choices in a safe environment, and then give them the chance to respec.
Right.
I guess maybe a modern System Shock would be, okay, we're going to give you this introductory area, which is kind of what this is, but maybe kind of in a Deus Ex way. Like you have a hack path, a brute force path, a stealth path, and then you can work your way through the introductory area however you want, and then maybe there's a point after that where they're like, hey, do you want to respec or whatever?
You know, by wearing, like, it kind of wears its replayability on its sleeve. You know, we force you to make this momentous, uninformed choice, and it just begs you to come back and make it again, like with all the knowledge you've learned from your first playthrough.
I mean, yeah, I like the idea of like having a dojo where like you sort of go and you train, and then you have to like pass the final exam with the thing in order to get the thing.
That makes sense.
I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure there's plenty of people who started OSA and then like an hour in were like, this isn't working for me. I need to go back. Because it is hard to play.
That made me jump.
The first third of the game is hard as OSA.
That's always one of the things that in games like this, this is an awfully reductive way of thinking about it, but I always think like if I roll a certain way, I have so many stats that are limitations on what I can do. I feel like with OSA, on top of health and bullets, you also need to worry about psi. So it just seems like but it still has to be balanced, right? So like psi can't be inordinately overpowered to make up for the fact that you do have another gating resource. So I've always been fascinated by that exchange of like you're kind of inviting more problems onto your head with not a whole lot of payoff.
Yeah, that completely separate economy. Yeah.
Oh, you guys mentioned one thing about how the character generation is kind of cribbed entirely from Traveler. That's something that I feel like maybe a lot of people don't appreciate, how much pen and paper RPGs do inform the creation of computer RPGs, at least Western computer RPGs. I can't remember when it was. Because I grew up playing like CRPGs, and it wasn't until I think I was, I want to say in my mid-20s when I sat down and did pen and paper for the first time. And then I was like, oh wait, this is just like a CRPG, except there's an actual human running the game instead of a computer. It's so obvious, but what else about System Shock 2 was pulled pretty wholesale from pen and papers?
Well, it's funny, you know, because there was little else to draw from back then.
Right.
You know, even Western RPGs were sort of in their infancy. I mean, I know a huge influence on at least Ken and I was Pool of Radiance and the AD&D Gold Box series, and sort of the way they handled things. But you know, there was so little that came before that I think we were all heavily influenced by our paper RPG experiences. I mean, I'm trying to think of a direct. You know, I wasn't a designer on the game, so I think, you know, John or Zimu or Ken could probably shed more light on like you know the things that were sort of one-to-one that they drew from paper game experiences. Also, you know, there was the change in UI 1 to this was actually a huge leap.
Right.
When you think about, that in itself was like you look at this interface now and it's so wonky, but to us it felt so streamlined, like so modern, so we did Bioshock that it was streamlined even further for the console. And some things get lost, but it's what the market will bear as far as complexity in time.
Yeah, that's been the fascinating thing to watch. Because it seems like, with games like Prey, that there is a sort of bend back towards more complicated game systems. Whereas, yeah, in the Bioshock era, it seems like it was really expanding the audience, and a lot of people were just coming in and experiencing these kinds of games for the first time. So it was really interesting to see the sort of like the tide come in and come out in regards to complicated RPG systems.
Well, I think a part of that too is the how you interact with it too. Prey did a really good job of having complex systems that had really easy interactions to get into, as compared to a lot of the older games that had the complexity but not so much the accessibility with the how to input into those systems.
I mean, I think there was sort of a sort of ramification of like where do you go next from like System Shock 2, and in some cases you have Dead Space on one side, which is more action console driven, and then a Prey, which really preserve as much as it can of the wonkiness of this, and the sort of RPG fussiness with with inventory, using an inventory grid. Some of it's almost retro in Prey, because there's really nobody else trying to do.
I have questions from the chat if you guys are interested in answering some.
Chat?
Yeah, the chat. A few questions that they want to ask y'all. Like the Silver Dogs is asking Yancey's hypothesis that the voice diaries were just done by people in and around the office. Is this true?
Not
or do you guys not
exclusively,
know?
but no, this is so back in '99, like you could, or '98, I guess. Yeah, '99. You could actually just have people in the office perform. So many of the logs, like many of the crew members, like I play crew member Bayless, for example. There's a few logs in there. I think almost everybody on the team plays somebody. In addition to that, for example, Xerxes, who he just walked up to, that was Steven, who played Garrett in Thief, and many other characters in Fallout. Mix, but most of the lead roles were professional voice actors at the time. Nowadays you absolutely have to be in the guild to be in a game. So
yeah, Shock 1 definitely was.
Each deck has a chemical storeroom where you can find the resources you need to research the artifacts you'll find around the ship. Don't try to carry.
Well, you sure could save a lot of money by doing that.
Yeah. I did one audio log. Yeah, do we have a contest where you could voice an audio log? I don't know.
There was a crew.
We had a contest where you could appear. We did a portrait of the winner, and they became a crew member. I think it was voiced by an actor,
right?
But they were a crew member, and I don't remember which crew member it is. But one of the logs you pick up is our contest winner when you see the portrait.
Cool. We're doing something similar with the Kickstarter backers at the higher tiers, where they write their own audio log, and we have Rob Waters do their portrait.
Nice.
So if I recall correctly, we had at the time we were having to deal with censorship, particularly in Germany, had very strict standards about video games. In Germany, you had to have the blood be pink instead of red and things like that. And I remember one of the things was what part of their standard was this thing called Menschveracht, which I think roughly means like disdain for. disdain for human life or whatever, which we're not allowed to have, right? So I believe that if you install the German version of Shock 2 and then you go find the config file, you go find the line that says mensch veracht equals 0 and you change it back to 1, and then you have all your.
And actually, the first year we brought this to E3, we were on the floor, tucked way back in some corner, but we actually had to run the German version because EA was concerned about Columbine had been just maybe a month before, and everybody was hypersensitive to it since video games were under the microscope then, as they are now. But it was a very different time. There wasn't a mass shooting every month, so everybody had to do a pivot to show some sensitivity to that. So we ended up actually running the German version and playing as OSA, so that there was just really as little actual gunfire in our playthrough on the floor as possible.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, like you said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually curious about that. How did this game demo? Because I feel like a lot of it
demoed poorly.
That's kind of what I was getting at. I mean, some things about it fit the time period it came out, right? Like the cyberpunk aesthetic, that was kind of a thing back then. Everybody in the West was kind of waking up to how cool anime was all of a sudden. So parts of it make sense, but also 99, I remember being a pretty amusingly dumb era in games. It's just a lot of bald dudes running around shooting, a lot of screaming and yelling, and a lot of very scantily clad women. And here's this slow, ponderous, stat-driven, moody game that,
yeah, on the floor it showed terribly. And you guys been to E3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There?
Yeah, but sadly never back then, man.
So back then, it really hasn't changed that much, except for the years where they kind of and 2010 or whatever. It's kind of gone back to what it is, which is loud and tons of people all jammed in, and that actually changed fundamentally that experience, because it was terrible. Nobody stopped and stayed. You needed quiet. You needed headphones. Nobody got it. That's one of the reasons why when we started showing Bioshock 1 at E3, we made the call that it would only be behind closed doors, and it would in a quiet room, because we knew we were making the same kind of game, a game that was not a high octane thrill ride, and so it was never going to work on the floor or on a big screen. So it very much changed the way we presented games at E3 in the future, which was here, sit down in the dark, listen to this, watch this, so that we can get across what we're trying to do. Otherwise we just got steamrolled.
That's really fascinating. I mean, obviously it worked. It seems like this is sort of my anecdotal observation, but it seems like the Shock experience really took hold with Bioshock. Perhaps owing it to being available on console and having all the marketing beats that just seem to really nail hard. But
and the year we first brought Bioshock to E3 and did that behind closed doors, I mean, it was an absolute phenomenon. We had a line around the corner just from word of mouth, and that pretty much confirmed that we'd made the right choice, because we know if we'd been on the open floor, even with headphones, there's just too many distractions.
So there was a question on the stream I noticed on the chat about, how is the Thief engine to work with, and that stuff. I'm probably the wrong guy because I actually made the Thief engine. So, just to clarify the relationship, Irrational and Looking Glass were in the same physical space for the entire development of this game, and I was a Looking Glass employee, there was support for the engine all the way, even to the point of you could, generally speaking, when we were compiling our code, even the Thief 2 developers were compiling System Shock 2 at the time, because we would basically had one engine with multiple games able to run out of it. So it was easy to flip over to Shock 2 and play that. So
the Thief code was kind of tucked inside the Shock 2 code that had been found on the Dreamcast port.
Right, yeah, and likewise the Shock 2, some Shock code has been found in thief drops of sources. But yeah, and in fact that probably was an impediment in the past to Thief and System Shock being revived, because everyone, there was kind of like this understanding that like there was no source drop that had only one and not the other. And so people were just worried that there were these weird rights issues around no one knew what source code they had. I don't know. Obviously, you Nightdive guys can speak a little bit more to that. But I remember that being an issue in the early noughties.
Yeah, it's amazing how many times we've gone to look for code for, name a game, and we've probably tried to track something down, and even the publisher or the developer or the original devs will be like, I don't know what happened to it. It's just gone. It was on a computer, and this company got acquired by this company, and it's a real shame how that stuff just kind of just vanishes.
It feels like. Oh, go ahead.
I think 20 years from now, when a game's being remade, there'll probably be a much better memorialization and warehousing of source code. It's just, I think it's a nature of the way the industry was back then, which was just kind of seat of your pants. Nobody was thinking necessarily about posterity.
Right. Well, there's a cloud, right?
Yeah, there's a cloud.
Everyone puts their stuff. Everyone puts their source code on servers and stuff like that.
We used to have to put it on digital audio tapes and then put it in a safe off-site.
Right.
Like Iron Mountain.
Yes.
I have a couple collected questions, if I could ask a few of them. So the first question's from QWERTDD. It says, were there any aspects of System Shock 2 or planned content in it that had to be cut due to limitations of technology at the time?
Saw that one. It's one thing that I think we had initially intended it, sort of a more impactful crescendo of an ending. And whatever the original plan was, and I can't tell you what it is because I don't remember, basically got turned into the ending that you get, which is probably one of the most, the best examples of video game anticlimax ever. So that was one thing. So there, grand scheme for a big finale certainly got tossed out. And then I think it's been a while, but I think we intended to ship with multiplayer initially, and that was something that got tacked on later. Really,
like
a plan
day
or
one patch.
time? It was a day one patch, yeah. But by and large, no. And it's not like today where you lop off a third of the game, to get it done. It really not recall. Another developer may remember cutting something huge, but I don't. I mean, with art, it's always, I wish I could have gone back and polished X, Y, or Z, but that's as true today as it was back then.
I have a feeling if you guys had better sort of in-engine cutscene tools, that you might have done more with them.
Yeah, that was tough. What do we have anything? I don't really recall. I mean, we have a lot of pre-rendered stuff in here, but
the scripting is pretty cool. Like, I noticed somebody was asking about the visual storytelling using the ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that, those were almost the scariest parts for me, because they would just appear suddenly, and they'd, their audio would be altered, and their ending would be very horrible. It would always be some dark thing that happened to them. And yeah, somebody was asking if that was the first time that somebody had used a ghost to tell a story on a video game.
I wondered that myself, because you see it a lot now. It crops up in a lot of different titles and a lot of different genres. Frankly, I'm not sure if it was the first.
Is there some lore to support that? I feel like I should know the answer to that, but I'm just going to ask it.
Yeah, there is.
Lord,
There
to
is.
support the existence of ghosts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to tell the shotgun story, though. So here we have
Okay.
some mutants with shotguns. You'll notice that they have a jammed shotgun with one bullet in them. And so originally they did not drop shotguns when you shot them, right? And they did not drop shotguns, and there was big playtest complaints about like, how come this guy is shooting a shotgun at me, and then when he's dead, he no longer. I can see the shotgun in his model. Where's his shotgun, right? And we couldn't pollute the game with, we couldn't just give you free shotguns every time one of those mutants spawned, right? So we ended up putting this like broken, jammed shotgun with one bullet in it. One shell in it in the thing, and then, but it gets worse because we did pollute the game because the players would do exactly what Daniel's doing, which is you take the shotgun out, you take the one bullet out, and you throw away the shotgun, right? And so what would happen is like you'd come back to level 1, and the level would just be a field of shotguns, like shotguns as far as the eye can see. And like the frame rate could go to 0 because it's rendering all these shotguns, right? And so there's actual code in the game so that when you return to the level, it looks for broken, jammed shotguns and just deletes them on the way back into level 1 because we had this bug.
Did you ever get anyone complaining about the inaccuracy of all the shotguns disappearing?
I don't know. I mean, they're probably on if they did that then, they're probably on the stream now. So
I'm sure there's somebody on systemshock.org that has that very same complaint.
It's a man with a beard in his basement saying, "I've been waiting for 20 years. Finally,
I have closure."
At last.
So was the jamming mechanic already in the game? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you continue. I'll have a question after.
Okay. Did you add the jamming mechanic just to make it so you could have, immersive shotguns on all of those zombies, or was the jamming broken mechanic already in the game?
No, jamming and broken was there before that.
Okay.
It was just I think I'm not a designer, but I think it was just a realism / resource entropy kind of.
Also, because of the nature of the model, because we were using basically the same exact rigging system as Thief, so we couldn't detach the shotgun from the hand. So there was absolutely no way to modern games to to prevent an open-ended either weapon or they just blow the weapon up. They just dissolve it when the guy dies. We didn't have that option. It was still still visually attached to his hand. So that's why we're sort of obligated to address it.
So when Daniel picks up the shotgun and throws it on the ground, are there then 2 shotguns?
Yes.
I think so. I think you will see a model of a zombie holding a shotgun and then a loose shotgun.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, I believe so.
It's a ghost shotgun. It's all in canon, man. It locks together.
Let's hit some of these chat questions. Some people I feel bad because people are asking cool stuff, but
I've been logging them in a notepad, so that way we can.
Awesome.
So I have one from Squid. I don't know how you would say that. Squid Nate. That wants to know whom's arm did you have to draw in reference for that arm for the one you're seeing when you're holding up the orb.
The cyan.
Yeah.
That would have been Gareth Hines, and he drew his own arm.
His own arm. Sorry, I'm just laughing at the question. It's a really funny question.
It's a funny question.
And then Silver Dogs has another question that says, who had the brilliant idea of weapon degradation? I can't say words today, apparently.
Weapon degradation was something that there's something that definitely came from paper games. So I believe that also came from Traveller. yeah, that maintenance was going to be part of it. It came from out of a principle that we identified that like the primary reason why System Shock 1 was so scary was resource scarcity. So you never find 40 bullets, and you never find there is no gun that lasts forever. And that in that way, you're constantly thinking about conservation of everything, conservation of your health, conservation of your ammo, and conservation of your weapon quality or state of repair. You're starting to see it reintroduced to certain RPGs now. But yeah, it was controversial
Zelda.
then. But we decided that it lost a lot of fear factor if your gun was 100% reliable. Shorted you ammo and shorted you health and put you in the same situation? Maybe. But I still think to this day, I'll defend it till today, that I still think it adds a dimension of dread, really, to the game.
And just entropy, the idea that everything is breaking down and nothing is reliable, I feel is a very valid and very meaningful contribution. Because something I actually
ultimately the enemies aren't that hard, right? The enemies move fairly slowly. They're pretty addressable. And if you had, a lot of ammo and your gun never broke, you just sweep these levels, in a minute. So I still think it's a huge part of the Shock experience.
So one of the things I really liked about Bioshock, I did not work on Bioshock at all, but one of the things I really liked about Bioshock was the way that they put all of the reward into the big daddies, and then all of the other enemies were like pure risk with no reward, right? And so like if you every fight in that game is like, oh god, another chance to waste ammo, or another chance to take damage, or another chance. There's no sort of RPG glee of just oh, I'm crawling the dungeon, hacking and slashing. It's all just oh my god, if I can avoid this fight, I would.
Well, it's funny when games give you near unlimited ammo and then also tell you that stealth is an option, and you're just why would I possibly do that? The game design, the game balance should be such that, is your only option, because you have 2 shotgun shells and 1 pistol round, and you organically realize, oh man, I can't afford to engage this guy. I have to sneak around him. And I think that's a sweet spot for an immersive sim where, it's not go from this pool of shadow to this pool of shadow every time. That's not real stealth. Real stealth is I have to be stealthy because I'm virtually unarmed right now.
I feel like there's almost a Lovecraftian element to that. You got 1 bullet for them and 1 for yourself.
For yourself, yeah. That should have always been an option in this game, suicide.
You certainly see that with a lot of ghosts. Cool.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
No, the inaccuracies of our rarely allowed us to actually have them point the gun at themselves accurately. So you see that they'll kind of they put it close to their face, but usually it wouldn't actually be a killing shot, and that's especially in the finale. Yeah,
there's a lot of things that are going into this game that are different than games now. Do you think that are there any things in Shock 2 that you don't really see in modern games that you feel you'd like to see more of?
You asking Nightdive guys, or are you asking?
No, I'm asking you two, the guys that worked on it.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't actually feel like a lot of this stuff is very rare. Yeah, sure, the mix of shooter and RPG is a little bit rare.
I mean, outside of an MMO, the one thing that this game has that we directly tried to address on Bioshock was, min-maxy incremental growth. We felt in 2007 or whatever that plasmid, you had to feel it, right? Like you had to feel an absolute change in what an engagement with a monster was like, or what your movement speed was like. In this game, like there was this incremental thing where you were taking one more hit point off per shot, and if there was something lost there in trying to get away from that, but we were very self-conscious about it on Bioshock. We were like, well, you put in a plasmid, your entire life has to change. It has to be significant. It has to have visual support. Spending an extra point in a certain skill, you're maybe not going to feel like it's night and day, but it may give you just the edge you need.
Or it's an investment that it's part of your long-term plan.
Part of your long-term plan, right? It's like sort of a delayed gratification thing.
And whether it would be better for you to just save up and buy the big thing, or I don't know.
Prey, I can't think of games recently where I've kind of sat there staring at the interface, concerned about my purchase, and worrying about buyer's remorse.
Right.
In some ways, Prey is the exception that proves the rule. Like there aren't a lot of games, trying to force you to make those specific growth choices that much anymore.
Yeah, and even the ones that do oftentimes have resets.
Or you look at the evolution of sort of character choice in World of Warcraft, where in the initial generations, building out your skill tree and where you're going to spend things was the most momentous thing. You would sit there and labor over what kind of character you wanted to be, and now you can be all of them simultaneously, and respec is essentially free.
And you have to be the thing that has already been done on the internet, or else your raiding party yells at you, right?
Exactly. Somebody's already figured out a recipe that you're a complete noob if you don't know it.
Well, I feel like that spiritually links to what you guys were talking about with weapon degradation, which is, and this is going to be an awfully hyperbolic way to say it, but sort of the bravery to make players endure less than optimal situations. Feels like a lot with playtests now, and this is totally anecdotal, but it feels like people play a game, they'll hear any negative feedback and then seek to remove that negativity from the product, so it's nothing but a pleasant experience all the way through. Whereas I feel like interesting game design will put you in places where you have to make yourself okay with the consequences of a decision that has some amount of negative consequence. Whether that's, okay, I spent this point on this way, so I can't open this door. So I know there's something behind that door, but I have to live with not knowing what it is this run, or something like that.
Shock, the rogue
Well, there's a lot to unpack
exactly.
there, because the one thing you did bring up is like developers directly addressing sort of in vivo feedback that they're getting, during development, or this was a time where you didn't patch a game every 2 weeks, right? So it's interesting. You didn't have as many bites at the apple with players as you do now. I noticed that I was playing Anthem a few months back, and they clearly made this design choice that they were going to force you to walk around their town, essentially their lobby area, so that you would experience that and get into the story and get into the feel of the planet you were on and the people that you were saving. And within 2 patches, they basically threw everything you had to do into town into a flat interface, so you didn't have to walk anywhere. It's you could say maybe it was a bad choice on their part in the first place to force you to walk around your interface and spend real time moving around a town to get to a particular interactable interface. But as soon as they got negativity on it, they abandoned it. I think they probably should have started there, but
sure.
You don't have the turnaround on feedback that you did.
Cognitive dissonance, though, was on our side in these days, where like, hey, if you dropped $50 or $60 for this game, you were gonna spend some time figuring out where the fun was, right?
Not to mention 6 hours getting it to run in the first place.
Yeah, or yes, not to mention the OS upgrade that you had to do, probably, if not the hardware upgrade, to get it to run in the first place. You were gonna spend a little bit of time, so we had you on our side a little bit more than a lot of games in, say, a free-to-play model would, where literally, if the game isn't selling itself to you from the moment you see it, then then you're already off to the next thing.
Yeah, we had. Yeah, nowadays you have to hit people with serotonin like within the first 5 minutes, or you've completely lost them. You have to do something completely satisfying and level up 12 times, and
Right.
Are you guys ready for more questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Got a little bit of backlog. This first one, though, from Planet 23K is technically for everyone here, including Steve, because it's a two-parter. The first part of this question is System Shock 2 source port possible anytime soon? And then the second question says, a question about the Talon droid. What was its original concept? I had planted a joke on Shotenpedia that it came from Terminator Future Shock, but it's obviously not a flincer. Not the flincer. So yeah,
Which are you
two-parter.
referring to? Sorry, the Talon droid. You said.
Yeah, Talon droid. They're asking about the original concept for it. And if it was influenced at all by Terminator.
Be a question for Rob Waters. I didn't work on that specifically, so I'm not sure about where the inspiration came
I'll
from.
have to bug Rob later because he is not online. But the first part of that question was asking about is System Shock 2 source port and if it's possible. And I assume they mean by how we did System Shock, the first enhanced edition, and the source port we did for that.
It is absolutely possible. We'll talk about that later.
Okay. All right. Next question. From Skeletorso. I think they asked a question earlier, but they want to know what your guys' favorite level of System Shock 2 is.
System Shock 2. Hydroponics for me.
I'm gonna have to go with upside down Rickenbacker.
That's a good one.
When you walk into the chapel, I guess.
Yeah, the chapel specifically.
The cross is upside down.
Any level design moment in this game is memorable to me. It's like having to not having a floor in the chapel and having to sort of walk on the beams of the chapel to get around. That's probably
I've worked on that, building that level with Ian Vogel, who's now a creative director at Amazon, but he was one of the level designers on this game.
Karlee, I've got a quick question. So the first System Shock didn't sell particularly well. How did, and you may not know the answer, but how did Ken and the team at Irrational, I guess, convince the upper echelon to greenlight this project?
They were absolute super fans of System Shock 1. So I think that they certainly had the passion to do it. I think I can't speak for Paul. You have this sort of there. That's even today, same case. It's always preferable to sort of do another cycle in the same IP if you can, rather than necessarily rolling the dice. Because even with low sales, you do have some brand recognition. Probably
you
help
want the shell. You want that one shell. I wrote that code for you so that you can have that one shell.
Guilty.
I didn't. There you go.
Oh, so Byzantine.
It definitely speaks to the OCD that I think everybody has too, because they're like, I gotta have all the resources.
And the survival horror of it, of I can't. That might be life and death sometime down the road.
So going back to the other question, I absolutely love the recreation deck. It's just
yeah.
The atmosphere in that is so good. I just love that area so much.
It was interesting reinterpreting, because these are all reinterpretations of System Shock 1, right? More or less. There's some things we didn't do, but you have that case. It was like in that case was a huge generational and technology shift. So it was always about sort of going back to the first game and looking at what we could hook into, and how we would reinterpret which a huge leap forward technologically, in this engine. Oh, here's a guy. This is the guy I did the concept for. These three. There's 3 classes. It's just a reskin of these security bots, but you can definitely draw a line between this guy and the Big Daddies, which I also designed. So, this guy specifically, the fact that his face is oriented on the front of his chest rather than up on his shoulders, like that's, I was drawing upon the same thing when I did the Bouncer Big Daddy for Bioshock.
Nate, were you, I guess, on the team in the pre-development stages, like the prototyping phase, where originally the idea for Bioshock was that there was going to be it was more biological, right? There were these like slugs that were, I guess, the main antagonistic force. I remember in Bioshock.
No, I designed those slugs. Like, I concepted the initial slug thing. We had the slugs, and we had this like really complex ecology where you could actually the slug would feast on a corpse, then he would know he was loaded with Adam, and he would go to a hive, and then that hive you could go there and get more Adam, or you could harvest him, or you could track him. And for one thing, the ecology itself proved just way too cumbersome, and nobody ever saw it working, right? Which is the problem with accurate ecologies. What you do is you do a cutscene so people can see how the how the ecology actually works, and then you end up doing them all as cutscenes because otherwise nobody notices it. The other thing is that the slugs were not evoking any kind of empathy at all. So we went through a cycle where they were like cute fuzzy animals, and they were these other things, and we tried everything, and then Ken finally said it's going to be little girls, and we were all like, "There's no way we can do that. There's absolutely no way we can have them be little girls." And Bioshock wouldn't be Bioshock without the little sisters.
I think that first time you choose to harvest or save a little sister is probably just burned into the collective memory of every single person who's played that game.
Yeah, and that was a move we had to play carefully. Like we, had to make all these rules. No, you could absolutely not shoot them. You couldn't, they wouldn't leave behind a corpse. They're, we had to deal with it gently, but obviously in the end it turned out being worth it. And it opened up kind of meandering for a while, and once the little sisters came in, the whole thing kind of unfolded. The final story that the game shipped with, and the final sort of point of view that it shipped with, all grew out of making that choice. Because before that, it was this game. It was going to be an immersive sim that really was about like managing ecologies, right? Like one of the early concepts was you could like raise or lower the pressure, the air pressure in an area, and that would change the vulnerabilities of enemies. And it all ended up being too wonky and systemic, and it had no heart, and it had no story. It had nothing that people could really attach to. It was just a sort of a soulless simulation. And so we migrated away from a lot of those concepts and started focusing more on who your enemies were, who your antagonist was, who the little sisters were.
All of that kind of makes the title Bioshock a little more appropriate. Thinking about managing ecologies and the growth of bioorganic matter and stuff. That's really fascinating. I didn't know about any of that.
Yeah. A lot of that stuff came from, I actually one day gave it was like this weird like Khan Academy lecture in genetics to the entire team, because I was a biochemistry major. I was pre-med, so I didn't study to be in video games either. But I explained to them how plasmids work, how you can take different traits and pass them around using these different, and that became a story thing for Ken, and that brought the bio into it.
Okay.
So if you ever wondered why all the Looking Glass and Irrational games are really, really good, it's because they were made by geniuses.
I don't know about
The
that.
simple ordeal of just having geniuses create something, and then that thing will be good.
So
I think
you're
we're geniuses.
saying-
It's that because you couldn't go to school to make video games like you
Right.
can now. We had more diverse backgrounds. People were English majors, they were history majors, they were chemists, they were physicists. And when you have that kind of pool of people, that's really what Looking Glass was, and to some degree what Irrational was as well. People draw those life experiences into games, and it takes stories and it takes concepts into interesting places. I think something is lost nowadays with all the vocational training now that I'm not talking about that it's the good old days or anything. I think it's wonderful now that you can actually pursue video game development as a career. And I would have done it if it were available, I think. But
Looking
a
Glass
little
was
is
like-
lost.
Go ahead.
That most game developers don't come from a liberal arts education anymore, and that was kind of a nice thing.
Right. I was just going to say Looking Glass was like 100% staffed by people whose parents were asking them when they were going to get a real job.
Absolutely.
I guess you could, if you look at many of the big AAA games these days, they're definitely have this homogenized kind of feeling that they have all kind of been inspired by the same thing, and that's the games that we played when we were kids, which are, for me, it was this game, right?
Yeah. Nice thing, and I would encourage, if anybody listening is, thinking of going into video game development, yes, do go to a program. It'll, in 4 years you'll get a really good set of skills. But for God's sakes, take some anthropology, take some literature,
Get some life experience.
get some life experience that is outside of video games, because you'd be shocked at how often it comes up. All your little avocations and things that had nothing to do with video games come up and are useful in creating something new, right? Like creating something that not everybody else is doing.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's certainly that's a feeling that I've gotten, Stephen. Kind of to what you were saying is that there was an era when game teams were 20 people or less. I always attributed it to there being, since there were fewer people to question decisions. So if one person wanted to do this fun, wacky thing to kind of express humanity, that they could just do it, and you only had to convince like 2 people. Oh, okay.
For sure, but also, the actual people making those decisions were different sorts of people than I think you find today.
Okay.
Different background.
Karlee, I think you have some chat questions. I see a lot.
I
and
do
some of them are
have
really interesting.
a few. First, I want to start off from our friend Kilgore Trout, asking if you guys have any memories from the original System Shock that influenced you when creating this one.
Are you cut off there when we were making this one?
Yes.
question?
Sorry if it might be my connection now. Kilgore Trout's wondering if anything from the original System Shock, any memories you have that could have influenced when you guys were putting together this one.
It's my face, by the way, on that.
That's your face? Oh my god.
You've aged really well, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Really gotten ahead of yourself.
Oh.
All right, Daniel, you're fired.
I'll stop the stream now. Thanks, everybody.
I mean, it was fresh in my mind because when I started working on this game, I hadn't played System Shock 1, so I immediately ran home. I got it for the Mac, actually.
Wow.
And played it on Mac. To roll a Mac back in that brief period where Apple let other companies make Macintoshes. I had to sort of, to the best of my ability, speed play it to get sort of up to date on, what exactly I was referencing. So it wasn't even nostalgia for me. It was a day-to-day, coming in and being like, oh, they did this thing in System Shock 1 because I just played it the night before.
That's actually funny to know that you just rush home and do your homework. The next question is from your parents asking when you guys are going to get a real job.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, what was the
Just-
question again?
The question is when we're gonna get a real job. Well, I think that, yeah. I think that
Oh.
ship has sailed.
Yes. The question persists.
This next question's almost a repeat of a question, but with a slight change from Expert 74, saying, was there any features you wish you could have implemented now that you look back? It's kind of to build off the question earlier, I guess, based off
Sure.
technological and scheduling, but I guess more so if you could have put in any extra in there, what would you have put in?
One idea we had that we couldn't do was we wanted to do a 0G level, and then we wanted to do like a magnet boot spacewalk outside the ship.
Oh yeah.
Was it inspired by Star Trek First Contact by any weird chance?
What isn't?
It was inspired by Outland,
Oh yeah. There you go.
one of my favorite movies of all time.
Mine too.
Yeah,
Oh, I haven't seen
very
this
much
yet.
wanted to do.
Oh boy, I'm into this.
But
Sean
Outrage.
Connery's Space Sheriff. Okay.
Oh my
and it's
god.
actually a science fiction retelling of the Western High Noon.
No way.
Yeah.
It is absolute genius, and
I think
you know
you're just
it's
making this up.
Oh, if you have not seen Outland, why don't we just flip the stream over to Outland? So
we all just watch Outland together.
yeah.
What I'd like to know is who designed these really scary doors that are all close together, because this is just so scary. You've got to walk right up to these doors for them to open, and you know there's going to be something on the other side right in your face ready to explode.
I would say Mark would know more about those collision volumes that cause the doors to open.
I'm sure it was all hacks. In terms of like features, I'd like to. I mean, like obviously, I'm looking at it from more of a tech direction, but like, obviously, if we could have done better multiplayer, that would have been awesome. And also, like, just if we could have done more with persistence and more with, having more of the level available to you at any given time, and not having as many like elevators and airlocks and but having a sense that just like having the world be one continuous world that was like sort of
Well, it started. It was built that way. So we built these levels as these uninterrupted. The whole thing, like everything that's currently separated by an airlock, was done for tech reasons. We couldn't hold the whole level of memory, so we had to put you in this airlock where we could unload the previous, give us enough time to unload the previous area, load in the new area, and then let you out. And the thing is that still happens in modern games because artists and designers will always create too much content to fit, and so we ended up breaking these levels into thirds and quarters. Initially the only load was going to be the elevator, and then we quickly realized there's no way we could hold a whole level in memory. Instead of drastically cutting the levels, we put in airlocks.
Before I forget, we should tell the Old Man Murray crate story. We have these crates, right? And you've been searching them all day. Yeah, and here's another dialogue box you get from searching corpse, whatever. And at the time, Old Man Murray, which was a cantankerous review site at the time, which hopefully people of the day remember, they had an article which was like the crate rating system, which basically posited that time to crate
I remember that.
was a stat that was a hallmark of a good game, was the longest possible time to seeing a crate. And they mentioned System Shock 2, and they give us extra crap because, in fact,
we got a negative value.
We got a negative score because they gave us penalty seconds because we have crates in our tutorial. Because, of course, we have a tutorial for opening up a dialogue like this and getting the inventory out, right? And so, and of course, the thing that you opened up was a crate. And so, and I just remember there was some little bit, there was some little narrative in there about like imagine at the headquarters they're saying, We're gonna need to teach people what these crate things are. These are so strange. We're gonna have to put them in the tutorial.
That
yeah.
site was actually run by Eric Wolpa, who at the time was just a really smart troll, and he went on to write and Portal 2, pretty much all the dialogue you know from Team Fortress. That's all Eric. He's since retired from games entirely, but he went from, being sort of a video game curmudgeon to doing some of the best writing at Valve.
Spooky cutscene time.
It was called Start to Crate. We were being corrected.
My favorite webpage of that era was Adrenaline Vault.
Oh, A-Vault.
Oh yeah, A-Vault.
I guess we're falling full down the late '90s rabbit hole now, huh? Or like Happy Puppy and all that.
Someone has a question about plot holes, if that intrigues you guys.
Don't exist. How dare you?
Planet 23K asks, how come the launched Gamma Grove traveled so damn fast to Tau Ceti 5? If you count the speed, it's absurdly fast.
Are we to believe? No, I can't address it. I'm not responsible for it. I'm not responsible for that plot hole. Credit for choosing Tau Ceti 5, which I think is still the closest system to us. Closer? Is that the case, Mock?
Well, Proxima Centauri is closer.
Proxima Centauri, yeah.
But
no, I can't
right
speak
there
to the
in the
travel
name.
time.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to go there. I mean, you can imagine. I mean,
I think it only took 12 parsecs, right? Something like that.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of in-engine, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the next questions are semi-tech related, but I'll let you continue.
Oh, I mean, mine was tech too. We just saw, I guess, so a lot of the game, people are asking about ghosts and things like that. A lot of them are sort of like Half-Life style cutscenes that occur behind a window or maybe in front of you, but it's a non-interactive sort of deal. That was a different sort of cutscene. Like it warps you to a different spot. It's an on-rails fly-through, which, of course, Half-Life also kind of did some of that stuff. But was it difficult to like dip to white and then just blink the character into another area, or was that pretty accommodating by the engine at that point?
I mean, we tried to avoid doing that as much as possible. I mean, you got to remember, Half-Life came out while we were making this. So when we saw Half-Life, like, well, one, we wanted to all just quit and go home. Like, we were like, why are we even bothering now that this exists? But we definitely learned a lot from them. Basically having non-rooted, cutscenes that you can turn around and miss. I think, we started out with this with a philosophy that I think a lot of people have adopted now, which is that no, we're absolutely not going to do cutscenes. Everything's going to be an IGC, and you will have the option to look away, but we will take steps to prevent you from ruining it or interfering with it. And that gets carried over into Bioshock. It gets carried over into Bioshock Infinite. You see it in Prey. It's a pretty common conceit now.
Yeah, no, the engine did not really contemplate that stuff really well. And yeah, they kind of assumed that you were constantly wanting to walk around, and to actually make the player uncontrollable for the duration was a huge pain in the ass. And
a lot had to be changed with this engine. So you look at the walls here and you see the sort of non-interactive decorative items. Anybody who's worked with Unreal in the sort of modern age would know those as static meshes, right? Like you have this world, and then on top of it, you get these instantiated meshes that are relatively cheap. The problem was the Thief engine and its pedigree. Basically, every object in the game at one point carried every property an object could have. So correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mark, but it was like a sort of a holdover from the Act React, where everything had a long list of properties, even small decorative items that were on the wall. And I remember you guys stripping that out, I think, for Thief 2, basically giving us lighter weight decorative meshes that we could use to do these wall panels and things like that.
It wasn't that bad.
Not bad.
And it wasn't that bad. There was a lot of they were similar to prefabs in Unity. They
Hmm.
except they weren't actually copied. It depended on how you built it, but you could
Right,
certainly
right.
share.
Yeah, see, watch
a
this
lot.
suicide. Not quite. Yeah, we didn't have fine-tuned control over animation back then.
That's close enough. It's Kabuki Theater. It all plays.
Yeah, it's good.
But even just the, I guess I'm curious about the technical of moving to a different spot and also like loading up all those textures and stuff like that. Is that all part of the level load? Is it just like someplace floating off in 3D space? So it's just already.
It's a green room. It's a
Okay.
green room, so it's already sitting in memory, and you teleport the camera, which is a pretty common thing to do in the modern age too.
Were there any? So you mentioned like particles and things like that. How certain technology can interface with game design or level design and communicate things to the player. What specific technological hooks did you make for this game that were kind of necessitated by the gameplay? It's maybe more of a Mark question.
Good question. Still on?
I'm back.
Oh, sorry.
My kids were.
Yeah, I thought
Okay.
I heard I guess I'll restate the question then. You mentioned being really proud of particle effects. This was sort of like, late '90s was the era where every new kind of 3D shooter brought some new bell or whistle to the table. It was like dynamic lighting or particle effects or things like that. What about? And you mentioned particle effects specifically communicating to the player which direction that lifts would travel. What other technological aspects of the game did you find that were really required for gameplay, for communicating things to the player?
Well, I know that this was shared between Thief 2 and this, but this was the first time we got colored lighting
Right.
in drama in the Thief engine, and that turned out to be huge. Everything from directing player attention to changing the mood, things like that. Because Thief 1 only had white lights, and that was a huge technological change for us. Also, I believe. I could be wrong about this, but blinking lights, not like these blinking screens, but actual physical blinking lights that
Right. Yeah. So
we had 2 bakes of the light map basically.
yeah. The light mapping in Thief was very expensive, and so actually having a light blink meant you had to rebake the lighting, and so yeah. So Thief. So this was the Thief 2 engine, which Thief 1 is actually done entirely with basically 8-bit color, or it's an 8-bit palletized back buffer, which means that literally there are only 256 colors on the screen at any given time. And so you had banding and you had all these effects that you don't see in this kind of game where you and you could have, I believe you could have colored lights in Thief, but you could only have one color was the limitation. It's like you just got to pick what color
That's
all
right.
your lights were, and if you didn't pick white, then you had a pretty weird looking level, right? So
Whereas this game had a mind-blowing 256 colors.
yeah, or something. Well, no, it was probably 65,000. It was probably 16-bit color.
65. You're right.
Although what we're seeing now, what we're actually playing, it might actually be 24-bit color at this point. But
yeah, definitely.
Do you folks have any recollection of how the game sounded during development? The game is really widely praised for its sound design, especially for the time. But was it one of those things where the sound was sort of shoved in last minute, or was it there all along? And
audio and game development, and this holds true today too. Audio always comes in last for a number of reasons.
Yeah, John.
Oh shit.
Changes to design, changes in characters, everything like that. Like you want to be as close to the end as you possibly can be, and still finish on time before you have audio come in. because it's it's time consuming, it's heavy. Audio's trying to put together an entire soundscape. In this case, we had Eric Brocious, who's he truly is a genius, and he can work without the game in his hands, just knowing what he has to make. He was very intuitive about that. But still, because of the nature of things, we didn't work, generally speaking, with a lot of audio. That's like this big Christmas present you get on the end of the development of any game, is you've been essentially working in silence or with placeholder sound or with robo voices. And then
A lot of
there's this
placeholder.
week period where at the end where everything goes in and the feeling of the game fundamentally changes.
But you have to have placeholder sound.
Oh boy.
But you have to have placeholder stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild to me because sound it's gameplay vital in Shock 2. Like it tells you what enemies are close and how close they are, what their alertness is. It communicates so much to the player. I'm kind of surprised that you guys were able to create and balance the game without that player tool being available. I guess it might have just been placeholder.
Yeah, I did find in the game files there's some spoken speech of like saying their game state. Which is
attack, search. Yeah.
I remember
all the audio files now.
Ouch, been hit.
Something we still do with AIs in development now is they report their state. Because yes, you can get it from a spew where you can see what they're thinking, but it's much easier to have an audio file that says what they're thinking. And then it gives you a 1-to-1 when you're doing recording later, like, okay, we need 12 search lines, or we need, 4, I'm ready to attack, or I'm about to fire audio clips.
John, I want that to be a mode that you can unlock in the System Shock remake.
I remember Tim Stelmach's in Thief. He did a placeholder for the drinking the air potion that was just him saying air potion.
That just makes me think of Hercules just screaming disappointed. His line, how he was supposed to be disappointed when saying it, but Anywho, I have a question from Flint 404. Flint 404 asks, could you ask the devs about the mini, from what they got inspiration to make that level, and did the inspiration come from the movie The Thing?
I'm not sure where it came from. It was part of the story that Ken put together, that because he knew he wanted to have some sort of that would be in some ways a story foil to Shodan, that would have a similar but different omniscience. So can't really introduce a second sort of aggressive AI that's trying to kill you. I can't say that I remember much more about the genesis of it all than that. Going to be biological, and it was going to be a hive mind.
That's a good contrast for Xerxes, at least in the early game and it's also that fun twist of and a lot of the Shock games, this almost kind of became a calling card of you establish your villains and your threats, and then you subvert it so that the thing that you thought was the enemy may not actually be, or there's more to it, or something like that, or a lot of unreliable narration and things like that. So
absolutely,
it seemed, it's that's one of the things that really hooked me about Shock 2 early on, is that it starts off seemingly templatized. You have your kind of like James Cameron terror in space sort of setup, and then there's this whole other thing that also adds this mystical element into it, this kind of supernatural. And it does seem like a lot of Shock seems to be about the loss of individuality, or the robbing of it through some grand philosophical imposition of will. So it's kind of interesting that there can be multiple parties that are all attempting to do that with different angles.
Yeah, it's always, that's one of the commonalities. One is failed utopia. That's a key hallmark of any Shock game. And the other is, to what degree are you willing to defile yourself to be successful? Which is the sort of the fundamental. How much are you willing to change your body? How much are you willing to question or to change your morality? How much are you willing to, all those questions come up, and whether it's Bioshock or the Shock games.
I can't remember, but was there ever like a? I feel like most of the Shock games also try to make you seriously wonder if you're doing the right thing. But I feel like in Shock 2, and this is dipping back pretty far in my memory, so I could be off on this, but I feel like the many is never really positioned as a, well, they might be onto something kind of entity. It's like, no, they're just trying to like conquer all life in the universe, and maybe that's not a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I have to admit, I don't entirely remember the Many's story arc, as it relates to the player directly. It's been so long since I've played.
Yeah, I felt like it was more of a like, how much are you going to allow the enemy of your enemy to be your friend, given that the enemy of your enemy is Shodan.
But they definitely were much more of a tentacle twirling villain.
Right.
Well,
Now, Nate,
it's funny too. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you had said that you didn't remember what the plans were for, I guess, the ending that you guys had in mind, but I'm just curious, like, is there any recollection that it may have been a player choice thing? Because you are given a choice, but the player isn't given the agency in the game. It's just
I think that. Again, I don't remember the details of what was left on the cutting room floor, but that certainly sounds right. Like, that sounds like probably the thing that we would have wanted to do but couldn't. Oh, another thing about the Many, though, the doors, when you're inside the actual, the body of the Many, you have those like sort of strange sphincter-like doors that open. Mm-hmm. Probably won't get to it in this playthrough, but I made those doors and I made the texture for them. And actually, we had to use a lot of photographic texture back then. We didn't have anything like Substance or anything. That texture was generated from a still of Josh Randall, one of our audio guys and composers, his colonoscopy. He brought it in. He brought in the video of it, and we actually like froze a frame and like extracted the colors and some of the shapes and sort of photoshopped them together. So the sphincter is drawn from a real sphincter.
I'm freaking out right now.
Even from the moment you started that sentence, I was like, he's going to tell us it's a real sphincter.
I just started internally screaming.
All right, guys, I got to sign off.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. It was really wonderful for you to be able to join us. The information that you share with us is invaluable. Maybe not as invaluable as the colonoscopy thing, but
there you go.
Great note to leave on.
Fun fact of the day.
If that doesn't end up on Wikipedia, I'm going to be very disappointed. But
I want to tweet it out, but
thank you so much, Mark.
Right.
It was wonderful to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Karlee, feel free to tweet that out with a screenshot of.
I feel like I wish I was typing that up as the story was going on. Like, whew. I'm just gonna put trivia, real sphincter images. Right? That's what the chat's saying.
Yep.
Kilgore Trout has it. The sphincter is real.
Somebody is actively editing the Wikipedia page for System Shock 2 right now. I can feel it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to rewatch this time clip so I can type it.
And not only that, but I think we're gonna have the rights to show Outland on a stream or something. It's so crazy. Like, I've seen so many science fiction and I kind of pride myself on my how many obscure things I've seen, but I've never heard of that film.
Oh, it's amazing.
That would be a fun movie stream. Group movie time.
I mean, to know that it had such a profound impact on System Shock too. I mean, that's just like it's required viewing for everybody on the team.
And when I got to Arcane as well, there were 5 copies on the shelf. So it casts a long shadow over modern sci-fi.
I would like to ask you about your time there. Primarily because Harvey Smith was QA on the original System Shock.
Was.
And of course, he went on with Warren Spector to work on Deus Ex before starting Arcane and everything. But like, you guys must have been playing this game. This must have been part of your internal zeitgeist when working on Prey.
I wasn't there for main Prey development. It had finished up before I started, but I did work a little bit, very little bit on the DLC, just a little art stuff. But yeah, I mean, talking to Harvey, this was clearly a very beloved game for him. Both the first, obviously, and then this, and I don't think he ever lost that bug for immersive sims. You see it in Dishonored, you see it in Prey. A lot of the concepts have been modernized or changed, but much of the fundamental storytelling, I think, harkens back to experiences he had playing this game and others like it. There were two paths you could follow, leaving this era, right, and heading into the 21st century. It was, you could follow more of a System Shock 2 path, or you could follow more of a Half-Life path. Where you're going to have this highly narrative but very linear, but very polished experience that you get from that, from Half-Life, or where you're going to, continue to focus on player choice and character development.
Did the
clearly was more enamored of the latter.
Did the announcement or any of the news surrounding Half-Life, did it impact the development of this game at all?
Yeah, it did. I mean, one thing that was definitely influenced, and we didn't have the tools or the time to do what they did, but that the intro sequence at the very beginning of the game of you leaving the hibernation chamber and sort of making your way through and having this controlled experience that was semi-interactive, a lot of that we, from Half-Life. I think in retrospect we would have loved to have gone back and done that legendary tram sequence at the beginning of Half-Life, where they're able to introduce you to all the backstory, without a single piece of text. You get such a huge slice of Black Mesa, like as you're going in, you see aliens, you see robots, you see scientists. It's completely amazing.
Yeah, just from my own experience, as a kid in 1998, we had a Pentium 100 megahertz computer with 16 megs of RAM, a 1 gig hard drive, and all that I cared about for like 2 or 3 years was Half-Life. Like I devoured every screenshot, every article that came out in PC Gamer, and I got the game as a Christmas present. December 1998. We had to essentially uninstall every program on our hard drive in order to get it to fit. And I really I loved it. I ate it up. And of course, I'm a kid. I think this is going to totally give away my age here, but I think I was in middle school, like maybe 8th grade or something like that. And a friend of mine came up to me and was like, yeah, Half-Life ain't shit. And I was like, how dare you? It's like, have you played System Shock 2? Like, what? No, what even is that? And he's like, he just left, without saying a word. And the next day he came up to the table and he handed me the entire full big box thing with, the foil cover and the gate fold and it opening up. And he just gave it to me, and, and that was that. And he's like, play this tonight. And, you'll see Half-Life, it ain't shit or whatever. So
when you're married.
So I remember, I went home and I installed it and I played it and I was like, oh God, like this is what this is the future of gaming. But that just goes to show you, I think that the marketing and just kind of the money spend from EA's side, essentially it just wasn't there because.
No, I mean, so the game was released by EAD, which I'm not sure still exists, but it was just a small sort of offshoot distribution part of EA. I can't say this for sure, and I can't speak to what the executives were thinking back then, but we certainly got the sense that they thought this was going to be a doorstop, and there was no reason to put any money behind it because, it was too niche, and it wasn't the same graphical standards as the other blockbusters, that were its contemporaries, and that has an effect. It has an effect on how your publisher feels about your game and its potential to be a big hit. Could say I still think it probably is super niche. They were probably right about that, but yeah, I think with more marketing, it probably would have performed at least to expectation rather than under it. Earlier, you guys, because I cut myself off. You asked me what other games I worked on, so it was this. This is my super quick biography. It was Thief, then System Shock 2, and Bioshock Infinite. Then The Last of Us, then briefly on the endings of Edith Finch, then Rise of the Tomb Raider, and then, yes, projects I can't talk about.
Wow.
Swap 4.
It's a hell of a resume.
Swap 4 in there, too.
Yeah, I was saying, and this kind of goes into another thing that I was just curious about, but, a lot of these original development teams, the guys and girls at Irrational that worked on this, it seems like your influence and you've kind of spread out, and you being a God, what did you say, molecular biologist, biochemist, so like virology, right? Like you guys have been this virus on the game on the game industry. You've influenced so many things.
Well, it's funny, we used to think back in the day, like, boy, this industry sure is small. We keep seeing the same people at E3, and it seems like there's only 20 of us. And you'd think that with all that time that a lot of that has changed. But, I still run into people that I worked on this game with all the time. It's still actually quite a small industry. I mean, certainly specifically like AAA console and AAA PC, it's a lot of the same people. I mean, they've increased in seniority and title, but most of us are still doing it.
Has there been any kind of effort on the original team's part to kind of get together, like get the old band back together and make something again?
To actually make something again, I don't know. I mean, we do get together. We do have at least for Irrational, we have a meetup every year at GDC, and it's like, at this point, it's 20 years of ex-Irrational people fill up a bar. So we definitely run into each other and see each other. At different companies I've been with, come in and, oh, hey, there's 3 ex-Irrational people working here. I didn't even know that. But as far as, no, I don't think we've ever talked about specifically, but I have worked with almost everybody on other games. So the guy, Mike Swiderek, who did this interface, did all the UI on this game. He did all the UI for Bioshock 1. He did all the UI for and then he went on to Harmonix and did the interface for Rock Band. So there's a lot of cross-pollination of people from this title through the Bioshock titles that I continue to work with to this day.
That's really wonderful. There's like this common thread that kind of permeates a lot of the articles that I read about System Shock, and that's the effect that it's had on the rest of the industry. And I think a lot of that is just owed to the fact that the developers are working at these places, and it's just that's one of the bonuses that you get from hiring one of the original developers, is you get that influence, you get their collective experience, you get everything that they've learned over the years from these games that have kind of informed in a lot of ways where the industry is today.
Well, System Shock 2 is kind of like Outland. It was incredibly influential and nobody's ever heard of it. So
Yeah, myself included. It's like the first thing I'm gonna do after this.
We're watching that thing tonight.
Yeah.
Tonight.
And Lawrence, you said you had never heard of that too, right?
Yeah, no, that's new on me, which is weird because I've lately been spending my evenings trawling Amazon Prime for garbage science fiction.
Okay, I've got one. Have you ever seen the movie Hardware?
Yes. The like faux cyberpunk one with like Dylan McDermott, I think.
Yeah, from
Yeah.
1990. Yeah.
Does that have Flea in it? Because everything has Flea in it. It's got some musician playing a bit part. He like drives the boat. I don't know. It's all just tumbling out of me at this point.
This is a massive tangent, but Flea was in the last movie I saw him in was Baby Driver.
Oh, he was in Baby Driver.
Yep. That's so funny that you say that because we were watching that movie the other night. I'm like, hey, that's Flea. What the hell is he doing in this?
My apologies. It was Iggy Pop. Oh, it was Lemmy. Oh my gosh. So it had actually a couple.
Oh, Lemmy.
Yeah,
Lemmy
recipes,
was in it.
but yeah. So I guess they. I don't know if that's up or down on the musical cameo ladder, but there it is. Yeah, I remember seeing it. It's like, what the? Is that Lemmy? Yeah. Okay.
See
that's
this
Lemmy.
guy? You see how much he is the Big Daddy? Like I only have one idea apparently.
I think so. Just a little background for everybody on the stream. I had reached out to Nate to participate because I had run into him when he was still at Other Side Boston when we went to go visit them. And Nate came up to me and he's like, "Hey, you got to check this out." And he brought me over to his desk and he opened up this like ancient sketchbook, and it had some original hand-drawn watercolor concept art from System Shock 2. And he showed it to me and I was just like, oh my god, we have to archive this. We got to scan it. We got to make it available. And he's like, okay, well, you reach out to me. Well, it had been a couple of years, I think. And it turns out we were planning to release some of that today on the stream, but it turns out that it's already been out there. And it's on the...
Give them a link. Can you give them a link?
Yeah, I can totally give them the link, but it's been released on the Irrational like historical archive website.
Yeah, it was released like 10 years ago. It was like one day I had that sketchbook around and I was like, hey, let's scan this and put it up.
So I'm hoping that we can find the sketchbook and just make sure that every little bit of it has been archived. But yeah, I'll get that link up. And while I'm doing that, Karlee, do you want to ask some more questions?
If you want
We
some more,
actually
some more
just got a question. What was that? I'm sorry.
if you want to throw in some more viewer questions.
Yes. So we actually just got a question. Since some of what you guys have been saying has sort of answered questions, I've gotten rid of my backlog. But Zeknif, so-called, just asked, could you ask them whose idea it was to have the player take damage up to and including one-shotting the player for running into a wall really, really fast?
I'm not exactly sure what they're asking. Could you read it back again? Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Probably my reading. Could you ask them whose idea it was to have the player take damage up to and including one-shotting the player for running into a wall really, really fast?
Really, what? You keep cutting off me now. Sorry.
I don't know why I keep cutting off. That's weird. I'll do it one more time. Could you ask them whose idea it was to have the player take damage up to and including one-shotting the player for running into a wall really, really fast?
That was just
yeah
of the system. That was just part of the physics system. In that, when you calculate falling damage, you can't. It's just from a straight up physics impulse. It crosses certain thresholds and has certain damage associated with it. So, I think it was probably something. It was either something that was a bug, and then they decided it should be a feature. But yeah, it's the same calculation it makes when you jump off a height and land on the floor. It looks at your velocity and determines whether or not you were moving fast enough to take damage. So that happened naturally, and everybody was like, "Oh no, man, that's a feature. That's a feature. If you speed yourself up, and you're a fool enough to go running super fast at a wall, you should definitely take damage." I mean, that sounds like vintage irrational on Looking Glass.
Yeah, that was something that I think Daniel, you had told me about just recently. He's like, "Hey, did you know that you could run at the wall really fast and kill yourself?"
Yep.
I mean, it's
And then, oh,
Ballone's dead. I was just talking to him.
Silver Dogs is asking, what modern engine would you choose to remake System Shock 2 again if you had the chance?
I don't know if I can actually endorse an engine.
I think I'll be safe in here.
I think I can do that. I can tell you, I can say though that we had a lot of success, doing this type of game in Unreal, which we did Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite in. Kind of engines has actually narrowed significantly since this time. There was actually a lot out there. You actually had a lot of choices where things have sort of narrowed around a few engines nowadays. But just throwing it out there, I would imagine that a game like this would be made in Unreal.
I can see that.
That would be and that's more because I've made so many games in Unreal that it's like home to me. So,
In terms of character design and art design, you kind of brought up how similar that Loaderbot is to the Big Daddy, but in terms of character variety and like enemy silhouette and enemy mechanic, surely there's only so many like workable correct decisions, I would imagine. So I guess I feel like to me it doesn't feel so much as imitation or the same themes repeating as it's just like, well, a bigger enemy should look and move kind of like an angry gorilla in a way. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because
that's a pretty general sort of art approach, is that you generally want a silhouette to distinguish enemies at a distance. That's incredibly important.
Thank you.
Especially if the kind of engagement or their susceptibility to a certain type of weapon is super important and super core to the gameplay. You need to be able to read from about 50 yards off. Oh, I know that monster. He's vulnerable to electricity. I can now plan my engagement with him before he's aggroed, right? Like that's a big thing in immersive sims. Is do you have a moment to look at a room, look at a hallway, and plan your interaction, because you have so many tools, so that you could do something cool and smart before everything just instantly sees you and aggros. So that's definitely a thing. The other thing here is you got to understand is like these characters, we had about something like 250 polygons, 250 triangles.
Oh man.
Now, just to give people an idea, like most characters are between 20,000 and 100,000. And the stuff that's on the very edge now is going over that, to even 200,000 for. Okay. So, a lot of the design choices were what we thought we could do with the triangles we had. I mean, one of the reasons why the design of that security bot is so boxy is because boxes are cheaper. Anytime you did something super rounded, or you were going to pay a huge price in triangles for it. Even a simple tube, like the number of sides on that tube mattered. Everything mattered, because only have 1,500 triangles in view at any given time. Now you're, in the tens of millions of triangles per frame. So a lot of the choices had to be made based on like what we actually thought we could model. There was no way you could blue sky a character and be like, oh yeah, we'll figure out how to model it later. You definitely had to think about what you could actually reasonably model.
So that leads to, I think, a pretty chestnut follow-up question. Do you prefer working under those hard constraints, or do you prefer being able to blue sky? And I only say that because in a semi-creative field myself, sometimes I find that inviting restraint leads to inventive new solutions, whereas if you can just do whatever you want, then I don't know, it does. The process of like navigating boundaries and navigating restraint is really interesting for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it was Fellini who said that there is no art without constraint. Definitely feel that way. There are still constraints. They're probably not as severe as they were back then, but it was a double-edged sword. Like, you could actually walk away and say, yes, there was constraints, but you could also say, that's the best I could do. Nowadays, can't say, oh, we can't do that. No, you can do that. You have enough triangles, you have enough texture space, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, constraints were extremely comforting at the time, and that you're like, well, that's, I can't afford another triangle in this guy. Where nowadays it's, that anything you imagine can essentially be realized in 3D to some degree of decent fidelity. Yeah,
so
that means that a lot of bad ideas get executed to very fussy detail. Like you can't hide nowadays. You can't hide. You have to have a good fundamental design, and the principles that guided the sort of low poly modeling of characters and spaces still apply. It's still about composition. It's still about light and dark. Like, no amount of polys is going to save a bad idea, a fundamentally bad design idea. So, whether you had 150 or 150,000 triangles to model something, like, your core idea had to be solid.
So you're like, this is totally my language, because in case anybody didn't know, my original training was as a character artist. So, like, silhouette, value, light and dark, that all that is like supremely, that's the gospel of the artist, right? And one of the guiding principles and philosophies that I gave the Shock Remake team was, I'm going to basically give you limitations that are non-existent, but I'm going to force you. Yeah, I'm going to force you to work within these constraints, because we want this thing to be as authentic as possible. We want people to feel the same way as they did with the original System Shock games. And this is just one of those things that is going to make or break, because the art style and that feeling of nostalgia has to be incorporated. It has to be one of those things that you feel if you've played the original game, but it also has to still be kind of accessible to like a general audience at the same time. And so it's really kind of forced our artists and myself to think within these constraints, and the art that we're creating, it's like, it's low poly, and it uses very specific, UV limitations as to how much space you've got for your texture sheet. And I like to think that it's really resonating with people, because so far it seems like everybody's very pleased with the art style that we've created.
Yeah, I mean, the properties of what makes for good art is obviously, they are thousands of years old, not decades old. They're old principles, and you can, we talk about those huge unlimited poly limits and render passes on a given texture, but then you have a game like Fortnite, which leverages none of those things, and I think looks absolutely fantastic and fun and cool and juicy, and like all those things. So it's not necessarily about the technology. It's about having sort of a fully developed idea.
I still think that
visual point of view.
Like Team Fortress 2 is kind of like my penultimate example of how you do a multiplayer shooter, because you've got these very distinct 9 classes of character, and they all are instantly recognizable from any distance because of their silhouette. Like, that's the most important thing about them. And whenever I play a shooter, like I'm just going to throw these under the bus because why not? But like Apex Legends, for example, or Lawbreakers, which was, Cliff Bleszinski's last project. I took one look at them and I'm like, how the hell am I going to tell what I'm shooting at? They all look the same, like from their silhouette. Yeah. So, and I don't know. It's just, it's
Team
really
Fortress is a
refreshing to
high
hear
bar.
that.
That's probably some of the best, some of the best character design that's ever been done for a game. So it's tough to hold yourself up to that.
All right, but it could be done. It could be done. Like they've
Absolutely.
proved that
What
it
it
could
doesn't
be.
require, what it doesn't require, is a lot of sophisticated technology. It requires like good fundamental art and stylization. All things that really come from 2D art more than anything, and then finding a way to sensibly execute those, in a 3D space.
That's
It's
actually
hard to
one of
do.
the, yeah, that's actually one of the, for me, one of the things that was so fundamental about System Shock 2, or what it taught me about games, was that because it did come out in this era, at least for my recollection, and especially in the PC gaming space, where there was so much anticipation about technological breakthrough. I think there was that, the id Software chestnut of they would come up with this new technological thing, make a whole game around it, and then the game was that tech. The game was, pseudo 3D, or it was full 3D. But something like System Shock 2, it used existing technology. It had some graphical bells and whistles, but it wasn't necessarily like a tech forerunner, at least as far as I as a consumer could tell. But it took existing systems and implemented them in such a way that really showed me that it wasn't about poly counts or lighting or anything like that, or resolution. It was about smart gameplay and good design. And those are the things that mattered. So I think we all kind of have that one game.
Yeah, one of the nice things about modern engines and modern graphical systems is that not everybody who's listening here is going to remember the arms race between id and Epic on engines, and that including Monolith and a bunch of other engines and Embryo and all the other engines. Is that everybody's crossed a threshold of sort of verisimilitude of simulational ability to do physically based materials and physically based lighting, that the arms race is finally over. It kind of doesn't matter anymore. Like, viable and available to you now can pretty much do all the things. So really now it's down to content. So we don't have that thing where it's like each engine implements a new feature and you're supposed to get a new graphics card for it. That's slowing down significantly. And that certainly frees developers to just kind of do what they think is right for their game, and not be like, oh, well, we have to have real-time blankety blank because they just added it to Unreal and that feature is going to be on the box. Like, that's kind of over. And we were certainly under that pressure back then, to be like, what are our bullet point tech features? Nobody puts that on the back of a box or in the digital description storefront like anymore. Meaningless.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been facing most recently is the advent of real-time ray tracing. So I would totally agree with what you're saying, but there's still there's that next leap, right?
Yeah,
there's
still
people trying to push the technology, and I would argue,
Those people are engineers. They're not artists. Like, I think that
yeah,
will never stop until they've duplicated reality. But that doesn't mean that artists have to do that. Like, there's no reason whatsoever that art has to follow the photorealism track that drives the engineering of this technology. In fact, I look for every opportunity I can to escape that. Because at that point, like, fire all your artists and just do photogram of the world. Like, why would you have anybody concept anything or think things out? If that's really what we want to do, is like walk around like pixel for pixel accurate Cleveland, we can do that.
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't
why?
sound like a game. It doesn't sound like a game I want to play. Yeah,
it'd be cheaper just to fly to Cleveland. It's funny that you say that, because the whole draw of RTX is, it's absolutely realistic ray traced lighting. And I distinctly remember watching the first kind of tech demos of Metro Exodus, using that technology. And as an artist, I'm like, wow, the authored lighting, the stuff that some artist went in and carefully lit, as if they were a cinematographer for a movie, looks infinitely better than just the artificial rays that are being calculated from this one source of light in the world.
Sure.
Everything was too dark. It's like, yeah, it's realistic, but it's like you can't see. And the engineers, their whole point was, well, now you don't have to hire a lighting artist. You can just calculate it all for free.
And
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I think one of the things you have to accept when you're a game artist is there's a certain numbing effect that happens, like in the third hour of playing a game, where you have to accept the fact that like nobody's really seeing the art anymore. Like they're seeing it, but generally, if they're still playing after 3 hours, the design and their goals in the game have taken over. So, what you have to do is kind of continually introduce new visual ideas, but like bells and whistle tech features, those are the first to get filtered out by our brains focusing on other things. So I don't think that like, and especially to like, if there's some indie developer out there thinking that like there's no way they can break into this industry because they don't have real-time ray tracing, it's ludicrous, right? Like you can be competitive in your space. You don't necessarily need all those things, and that's what I think I'm saying.
That's why
So you get 3 hours sound design, I get 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I played this game for like the 30th time. Is I don't really kind of care what it looks like. It's just me personally, but it's just the gameplay that's so fun. So I completely understand that point.
I do find something fascinating about the fact that this game essentially has 3 different entire groups of enemies. There's like the clean robots that are kind of sinister. There's the half hybridized crew of like the general crew members and the cyber midwives and stuff like that. And then you have the many, just the full-on biological enemies. Was it difficult to try and imagine that many different groups of enemies, make them seem like they're all in the same game, but also visually distinct?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it was a pass at trying to rationalize the just hilarious craziness of System Shock 1. Like cybernetic jaguars and weird robots, and like it was the most, I mean, those enemies are now, absolutely classic, but it was the most cacophonous like collection of unrelated monsters that were ever in a game.
That seems like the vibe of a lot of games from that era. It's just whatever was in your teenage notebook makes it in the game.
Yeah, outside of maybe Serious Sam, like I can't think of any game that just said, you know what? We're doing that one too. So, one of the passes we had to do is like, okay, we're gonna have these monsters grow up a little bit. We're gonna have them relate to each other, because I think we were again very self-conscious about just the lunacy of the enemies in System Shock 1. We were like, no, this is a grown-up game. We're gonna have these classes of enemies, and they're gonna be super believable. Still completely nuts.
You're referencing it being a grown-up game, I think really impacted me at the time, because I think you can take this in microcosm. There's like the cyber midwife, who is really creepy because all of her vocal callouts want to help you and mother you, except she's going to murder you. But you can compare that with the only female enemy in like Quake 2 is this cyberized sort of like stripper lady who has little metal parts over her boobs, and that's it. So for it being a product of its time, certainly it does read a lot more mature in that regard. I don't know, was that established early and there was never any contention about that we're not going to do like the typical 1999 video game thing with System Shock 2?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, but a lot of that comes out of, again, we were so limited on visuals that a lot of it came out of the enemy as potentially a target of empathy as well as fear. So, the whole thing about like the hybrids being like, I'm sorry, like they can't stop themselves from attacking you, to get that sense of pathos in there about the fact that like, oh my God, this is a real person I'm killing. They're not a monster. They just were, taken over by this bug. So that the player would feel a little bit of empathy or feel slightly bad about killing these things that don't want to be monsters. In the midwives, it was deliberately trying to make this kind of weird succubus Oedipal thing, something from Ken's mind for sure.
That one was all Ken. We'll say that.
I think it grew out of like, what kind of character is this? Since we God knows we don't have the polys to express, really what we want. But yeah, like games like Doom, games like Unreal, it really was about just streaming enemies at you, and nothing about them was particularly memorable. They didn't have a point of view. You didn't necessarily see how they fit into the world. I mean, that's changed now. I think almost everybody looks at ways of adding, texture and a little bit of narrative depth. Except for Doom, but they shouldn't. They should do exactly what they're doing.
It was certainly unique at the time. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, speaking of the Cyber Midwife, she's coming up in a sec.
Ooh. Yeah, that was especially creepy for those reasons, and I don't think my brain actually made that connection until you just kind of explicitly stated it. It's like, yeah, these people really didn't have a choice, and you don't really have a choice when you decide whether or not to kill them, because they'll kill you if you don't. And I was also going to say
we examine that player agency in Bioshock.
Yeah. And I was also just gonna throw it out there, but there's a mod that I'm not gonna.
No, Steve.
Oh, come on! It's the internet. We know there are mods, and we know what they do. There's always at least one mod a day after the game comes out.
There's a mod if you want to see more of the Cyborg Midwife.
I saw that. I saw that years ago. Yeah.
Actually, that person got a job from that mod, I think.
Is that what we're gonna be playing here?
Oh god,
no.
He shot me.
It's a great mod. I mean, not because of that, but the artistry of it is very well done.
We're still in engineering here, huh? It's a long game.
Karlee, did you have any more questions from chat? Are they still?
I do. I was just throwing them some System Shock 2 keys just now. Let me copy this other question that just came through, and I'll read you some questions.
Yeah.
It is a little bit of a backlog again, actually, but some of these questions might have been briefly touched upon just by conversation, but they're a little more specific. We have one from Silver Dogs that says, what did the devs think of the new intentionally low poly games like Dusk and Medieval that are out now? So you guys kind of started having a conversation about that, but I guess if we want to specifically say examples like Dusk and Medieval.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with like doing a deliberately nostalgic game. Like I love Grimrock, for example. Like I think that to really own it and be like, this is a retro game. This is what we're doing. We're gonna impose, we're gonna self-impose these limitations, really to generate a sense of nostalgia. And look, I mean, in the indie space, you see that happening with games and all, and every generation has a nostalgia for the games they grew up with. So it was pen and paper or text-based games or the early turn-based tactical games like Jagged Alliance and XCOM. Since it's remembering back to the NES, so they want to see 8-bit games because it reminds them of that. It's in some ways it's like to get that first high back. I think that first experience of playing Metroid or that first experience of playing Castlevania. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. I think it's probably, I've never done one, but I bet it's actually really fun.
I think too.
This is my favorite level that I mentioned earlier. I built this one. I built it with Mike Ryan. We sort of tag team this level, and it was really fun to do because it was really hard to do any kind of sort of vegetation back then because it was super expensive. So you did it with care. You were just like, I don't know if we can afford plants. But this is the one area that had plants and actually had white wall textures, which was something that we ended up sliding to because it took the colored light so well. Like it would give you that pure value that was coming out of the light. So this was really fun to do. Sorry, you were asking.
John?
I was going and I was saying that I think that you're talking about how it would be fun to do one of those games. I think that limitation can kind of work toward an art style too. We were doing a stream a little while back, and I remember talking with Alex Brandon about his score on Deus Ex, and him saying that the entire style of the music was just dictated by the fact that he had to work with a tracker system in the music and that. And I assume that you can leverage those as stylistic sensibilities in the same way visually.
I mean, there's certainly watch Stranger Things, and they're deliberately using like a Moog synthesizer to duplicate like John Carpenter's compositions for Halloween, and Vangelis and Tangerine Dream's music for Blade Runner. Like, they're giving themselves old instruments to play new compositions. It's certainly a cool artistic endeavor. I've never had the opportunity to do it in games. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Okay, the vials of Toxin A need to be placed directly into the environmental regulators. There should be 4 on this deck. If you can get a vial into each of the regulators, you should be able to significantly impact the growth of those despicable creatures.
Chat hitting us up with some questions.
A lot. I was just making sure I was not going to interrupt anyone. I do have.
I have time to take a few more.
A few more? Okay. Oh shoot. Okay, so Planet 23K says, speaking of midwives, I got a question about the alternative textures for the midwife. There are some non-horrible face textures in the files were they supposed to be. Also, there was there's also the same case with the Rumbler.
The non-horrible textures were the ones that generally got created. Back then, like, you couldn't. Nowadays, you make a high poly and you project its UVs down to your low poly, and you get this 1-to-1. I don't know if there's any character modelers on the list, but back then you made the character, and then in Photoshop, first you hand unwrapped all the UVs, and then you brought that wire file into Photoshop and you painted to it. And because of the way that the unwraps, because it wasn't an automatic unwrap, you actually had to take like the nice image that you intended to use and end up like sliding it and squeezing it and perturbing it and stretching things, so that when it got remapped back down to the model as a texture, it could address all the kind of squeezing and stretching, since you had so few verts for that texture to hang off of. So you often see weird spherical and stretchy distortions in the actual character texture. But apparently, like, I bet the source material is still actually shipped with the game, because there's always cruft, right? Like, that's probably why he's seeing that.
Yeah, that was like my first game industry job, was doing low poly stuff like that, and having to render the UV map to a 32-bit targa so that you could remove the UVs in transparency and then paint over it in Photoshop, and during that,
back and forth, re-import.
Yeah, like I created an action in Photoshop, so you just hit one button and it would save the whole thing out, and then you could go into the engine and see the changes automatically, and like that's how you did it. It's like this back and forth kind of dance, and then like you'd be like, oh shit, this UV doesn't have very good 0 to 1 space or whatever, and you change it and then go through that whole process. And during that time, ZBrush had just come out, so I was doing high poly 3D models when I was not working, and it's just so crazy to see how quickly things have changed, because now it's like you don't even, you still have to unwrap, but it's a totally different game.
It is 90% automated. I actually miss unwrapping my own UVs. Like, that was the most zen thing in my life, was to just like put my headphones on and like dig into a model and just hand unwrap the whole thing. Like,
vert by vert.
Like checking against a grid, trying to maintain texel density. Now you can just pelt unwrap everything, and it's kind of done for you, and done way better than you would do it on your own. But that's good. Ultimately, it's a good thing.
It saves a lot of time. And were you aware at the time when Hedis UV Unwrap had come out? And that was
No.
like the first like procedural pelting tool where you would have the model in 3D and then you could assign the seams on the model itself and then switch to another viewport and then like hit basically a button that would flatten it and try to get like the optimal, 0 to 1 space.
I'd say like the first time we started using some technology like that was on Bioshock. Jed, the guy who modeled all the characters for
Jed Wall.
Jed Wall, yeah.
Yeah, he's our
for all the
character
characters
artist on the System Shock remake.
Oh man, if you ever want to talk like the history of character creation, Jed's the one. But yeah, I remember Jed coming in one day with, I believe the tool was called Pelt. And I don't know if it was I think it was maybe some sort of plug-in for 3ds Max at the time. But yeah, I remember him showing to me like, check this out. And of course, back then, and like it didn't necessarily give balanced textile space and all that stuff. And like the tools now are much more.
Mm-hmm.
How did we get into this like techie shop talk? This can't be entertaining to listen to.
Hey, we've still got the same
love
number
it
of
so far.
streamers. Yeah, I mean, this is my language. Like I said, I was a character artist, so like I've gone through the whole gamut of tech up to what we do now, which is substance painter, substance designer, where it essentially creates the texture for you.
Yeah. But it, all of it, like it, all those tools are absolutely wonderful, and they can fast track you to something that's passable. But in the end, like it really comes down to that individual artist having an eye and having judgment over, things that have always been important to art, like composition and color harmony, and all these old things that like date back to like the Renaissance. Those are still the important things to learn for sure. Because the technology will just keep getting better. But if you're not a good artist, the technology is even better at exposing it now.
You got any more questions?
All of this. Yeah, I was gonna say they love the shop talk, and it led to another question from Bogbean, saying, "I'm currently doing a course for game design, and I was taught in a similar way by UV." Unwrapping by hand. How is it automated nowadays? Is there a software dedicated to automatically unwrapping models?
Oh, there's dozens. Generally now what you do is you pick, you hand select edge loops that you want to be the breakpoints. Basically like if you wanted to unwrap an orange's, the fruit, an orange's UVs, and you took a Sharpie and you said, okay, well, I want to split it along this line, and then I want to split it horizontally onto this line. Those are the cues that the algorithm uses to take the skin off that orange with a very balanced textile density, so that you can pretty much slap a tiling substance texture on it, and all the little dimples in the orange aren't going to stretch or be more detailed here and less detailed there. So to do it really well, you still have to be smart about, the 3D properties of the object and how it's going to unwrap sensibly. But once you do that, generally there's a bunch of pieces of software. And God, I haven't actually really modeled anything of actual game content in years, but I know there's a number of different tools that you can use now. Again, Jed Wall would be the person to get on to talk about the sort of what the state of the art is for texturing and unwrapping and high to low modeling.
Yeah, and I think that he's probably actually watching this stream. I sent him the link.
Son of a bitch.
I know. Jed
and I used to live together, actually.
Really? Jed, if you're listening, I mean, he's in our Discord channel. Just hop in the streaming channel if you want, man.
On the spot.
I will totally leak this information, but we are planning something very special for the Shock 1 25th anniversary, which is coming up next month. Oh yeah, he just pinged me. Oh, he says he doesn't have a Twitch login. Jed, you don't need Twitch login. Just hop into the
Discord.
You're in the Discord channel, man. Scroll down and hit the
Voice chat.
join the streaming channel.
Join us.
But we're planning a big box re-release of the very first System Shock game, and Jed is working on something very special for it. So that's all I'm gonna say. But
Fantastic.
Karlee, you got any more questions?
We can wrap it up with one last question, and so we can free everyone. And Jed just joined the voice.
Hey, Jed.
Hey, Jed.
Hey, welcome. Oh, he's got to set up that mic though.
I'll
What's
ask
up,
this
Nate?
one last question for you
Hey,
guys,
Jed.
maybe.
Jed, so you used to live with Nate?
Oh, he's gone.
Yes, briefly. Until I got mugged like around the corner from our apartment and decided I should move.
I remember Jed coming in and saying, "I'm gonna move. It's too muggy."
Hey,
Oh,
what puns like
Yeah,
that?
we
I
live-
can't believe that somebody took that.
Lived in this giant warehouse building that was a side
I-
building of a glass blowing
I'm
shop.
a notorious punster.
I've been asking a lot about character modeling stuff. Or have you been listening the whole time? Have you listened to me fumble through
Sorry
this
for the
entire
lag.
yeah. I was gonna say, you guys must have worked on.
Yes,
SWAT,
I've been listening.
SWAT.
Okay.
While
4.
I've been working on something for Steve while listening.
I was gonna say, Jed, are you listening to the stream and answering the questions, or because we're in real time here? I think he's watching the stream, but he's got Discord muted or something.
Oh, okay.
Jed.
Jed,
A lot going on.
I'm not sure where the
Let's get
source
to-
of the
let's
audio
get
is coming from at the moment. My
I
bad.
think he's listening to the stream.
Oh
Okay.
no.
Jed,
Hit the stream.
Jed,
Well,
don't cross the streams.
I'll ask you guys. this
Why don't you
last
fire me
question.
that last question?
All right, last question. It kind of will wrap things up. Dr. Noonian Song asks, maybe this has already been answered, but the devs have any idea that they were making a pretty amazing game at the time you guys were making it?
I'm going to answer that question with a question. Are you an actual doctor?
Oh, shoot.
Are they the same answer?
No. So were we making an amazing game? Were we making System Shock 2? Is that the question?
They're wondering if you knew that you were making an amazing game at the time while you were working.
No, like every game, you think it's the worst game ever, and it is the worst game ever until like the last 6 weeks. And I remember specifically, like, 2 weeks out from ship, being at the office late, entire thing, and it was then, and at that point, the audio was different every day. There was more and more coming in. At least then, at that point, I knew we had something special. I still think nobody was gonna get it, like. And I don't know to this day that people get it. Like, at the time, it was a bit of a weirdo as far as like its RPG details and its storyline. Like less of a weirdo now with all the other games that have come out that maybe have been influenced by it. I knew it was a great game. Did I think we had a hit on our hands? No. But I do, it's still to this day one of the few games that I worked on the entire game and then played it through several times from beginning to end simply because I enjoyed it. And I can't say that about every game that I've worked on.
Ooh, I actually have a follow-up to that, and you may have already answered it, but there's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately when it comes to anything in like entertainment or creativity is you can either make something that you want to be appreciated and seen by as many people as possible, or you can make something that satisfies a certain creative drive. Like you can make something that has a statement or fulfill something personal. And I feel like certainly System Shock 2, I think the history kind of tells the tale there. It's certainly one of the latter. It did something ahead of time. It certainly, pushed game design, but I don't think it necessarily enjoyed the acclaim that it deserved because of that. So given the legacy of the games that you worked on.
reach exceeded its grasp significantly. But I think that you can read our intent. You saw what we were trying to do, and I think that comes across just enough to make System Shock 2 special. I think that's true of it.
Are you happy with its legacy sort of being an underappreciated Renaissance game, or do you still sort of wish that it maybe had achieved a little more acclaim and renown for what it did?
I mean, the critics certainly. I mean, the fact that 20 years out, critics keep bringing it up, that's enough for me. That's enough that while it maybe didn't have the kind of cultural impact that Bioshock did, where people are having Bioshock themed weddings and Big Daddy's on The Simpsons and that sort of thing, it had virtually no cultural impact. But industry, within people I respect and people I work with, their admiration either in how it's affected the game they're working on or how it affected their career or their decision to get into games, I hear that a lot. And that's enough accolades for me, for sure.
And there wouldn't be Bioshock if not for System Shock 2. So
people forget that it was a spiritual successor. That the only name we could use was Shock, and we had to tack something onto the front of it. So
cool. So should we wrap? I think Jed just hopped on again.
You should leave. You should try to keep Jed on for a little while. He can keep fielding questions, but I'll say goodnight to you and all the viewers. Thank you guys for tuning in.
I think we're gonna wrap it up
fun
here.
for me.
Yeah, it's been
super fun trip down memory lane.
It's been 2.5 hours, I think, Karlee.
Just over 2.5.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna call it here. But Nate, thank you so much for your contributions here and on Shock 2 and answering all these questions, and thank you, Lawrence, for being here. I know that you're, when we first met, you were telling me how big of a Shock fan you were, and it was my goal to have you contribute to something like this.
I'm ecstatic that you gave me the opportunity. It's I certainly owe a lot of my thoughts about game design to System Shock 2, and it certainly broadened my horizons as far as what games could do. Man, what a game! So yeah, Nate, thank you for your work on it. Thank everybody who worked on it. Very, very humbled to be here.
Yeah, and
guys,
Mark,
I'm glad you guys are keeping the dream alive with your work.
And if Mark is watching the VOD, thank you, Mark, for sticking around as long as you could. He had a plane to catch, so he was he was sticking around as long as he possibly could. And thank you, Daniel, for playing Shock 2 while we all just talked and reminisced. And thank you, man.
No problem.
And thank you, Karlee, for entertaining the Twitch chat and taking their questions. And thank you everybody in Twitch chat for coming around. I think it's been probably our biggest stream we've ever
definitely
done.
Yeah.
And if you head on over to our Twitter, you'll see an announcement that you probably all knew that we were going to make. So check that out. Leave a comment there, retweet it, whatever. Anyone else have anything else to say?
Any day I get to play System Shock 2 is a good one.
Well said. I'll give that one a little clap there. That's good.
Thanks everybody. Happy birthday. Happy 20th anniversary System Shock 2.
All right. Cool.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.